your attention to our next speaker, which will be on Wednesday, December 9th, 2020. And on our third speaker series, we'll have Casey Grauer. She's a PhD candidate at at the Anthropology Department at Northwestern University. Uh, she'll be talking about the metaphysical access to water, an ontologically oriented political ecology at Aventura, Belize. And her talk will be on Wednesday, December 9th, 2020. So if you are interested in this topic and also you're interested in knowing more about EDGS lecture series and our overall activities, please do join our mailing list, which could be found more information on www.edgs.northwestern.edu. Uh, and please do check out our website. So today we really have an interesting talk. We have our very own Perdana Putri Roswaldy, or as we affectionately call her, Pepe. And Pepe is a PhD student at the Department of Sociology at Northwestern University. And it's really awkward to give an introduction to somebody that you know personally, but I'll try anyway. So Pepe's research focuses on land conflicts and the lives of post-colonial plantations in Southeast Asia. She's an awardee of Kellogg DRRC grant for this research. And also she's our very own Ironman scholar at the EDGS Northwestern University, and also keeping herself busy with being a graduate fellow in legal studies at Northwestern University. So today, Pepe will be talking about her project, Remaking Gender Without Flipping the Script, Socio-Ecological Limits of Undoing Gender in a Post-Conflict Community. Pepe will be talking for around 30 to 35 minutes, and afterwards, we'll begin our Q&A session. So for everybody who have questions, definitely just write it down on the chat box, or just raise your hand with the raise hand function during our Q&A section. So I guess with that, I'll turn it to you, Pepe. The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you everyone for coming up, like showing up, and especially thank you for my Indonesian friends, or like not my friends, but just here just because and to see my talk. I know it's like 11 p.m. now in Indonesia, so I really appreciate your excitement to my talk. So I hope that my research is will deliver its promise to you. If not, I'm sorry, not really my problem. Um, I will share screen of my presentation. Just give me a second. Okay. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint clearly? Cool. Okay. So, and again, thank you so much for coming to my presentation. And before I start, I would like to say thank you to my informants that are the community of Pandumaan Sipituhuta at North Sumatra, Indonesia, who warmly welcome me to their everyday lives. I appreciated their openness and vulnerability to me and their help to my second year paper, or like as part of this research that I show you is actually parts of my second year paper or thesis from at the Department of Sociology. And their politics of caring and staying natural or the environments ignites many possibilities of a better life many of us are pursuing. I also would like to extend my gratitude to the organization of KSPPM, or Kelompok Studi dan Pengembangan Prakarsa Masyarakat, or working group of people's independent development who guided me through this research. They trusted me with their constituents, taught me the Batak Toba language, and had provided a formative learning space for me during my research and fieldwork. This organization has been through thick and thin with the indigenous Batak people in North Sumatra, whose livelihoods have been threatened by corporations and the state. To them, I owe a lot. The Department of Sociology and Northwestern Kellogg's Dispute Resolution and Research Center had generously funded this research. And thank you so much to EDGS and its Ariman initiative for my PhD funding. And as a personal note, I would like to give a shout out to Northwestern University Community NordCops and truly support them in the abolishment of campus police department, maybe not just in the Northwestern, but everywhere. My informants know firsthand what police brutality means. And they also have shown me with their victory over the corporation what stands between the so-called anarchy or chaos and order is the materialization of caring and community power. As a sociologist, I believe it is my duty to imagine and help construct a better world in which we no longer have to hear a 60-year-old woman wailing to a completely armed police officer, begging him on her worrying knees not to take away her husband just because she and her partner wanted to protect their trees. So this research that I present you is actually a detour from my original research that wanted to talk about communal property and women's labor. But just like many ethnography, the research fell apart because the communal property, that is the forest that we're going to talk about further, actively disengaged from women, meaning women are not allowed to work in the forest. But I would like to emphasize that it's only to these villages, Pandumaan and Sipituhuta. So other villages or other communities of Batak Toba in other areas in North Sumatra sometimes let women become the benzoin tapper too. And as I will explain later, the absence of women in the forest does not mean that women have nothing to do with the struggle over resources. So in general, my case is about what happened to women after social mobilization over or movement for rights to customary property. So a little bit of, sorry, I think I put the Zoom here. So my study takes place in North Sumatra, Indonesia, specifically among the Batak people of Panduman Sipituhuta, and even more specifically is the Batak Toba, because there's a lot of Bataks in North Sumatra, and so this community that I work with here is the Batak Toba in the northern part of North Sumatra. And the villages, Pandumaan and Sipituhuta, so there are actually two villages, two different villages, so they have the same customs and they have the same language speaking of in everyday lives, have been in the national spotlight following their battle against Toba Pulp Lestari Corporation, or TPL, a pulp company that land grabbed 540 acres of the villagers' benzoin rainforest. The struggle lasted for almost a decade, 2009 until 2016, legally speaking. On June 23, 2009, without any prior notice, a backhoe went into the forestry area and chopped down the benzoin trees in the people's tombak, Batak's language for forest. And approximately 200 trees were cut down and replaced by eucalyptus trees. And the outraged villagers then organized themselves and asked Toba Pulp Lestari to leave the forest immediately. During the conflict, dozens of men were arrested and jailed without trials, and the corporation hired police officers, a mobile brigade or BRIMOB in Indonesians, and units to guard the forest and to intimidate local people. All of the intimidation, violence, and misconduct were well recorded by the organizations supporting the village and by the news media and the National Commission for Human Rights of Indonesia. My informants confirmed that at the peak of the conflict between 2013 and 2014, the women asked their husbands not to move about the village and to hide in their coffee and rice fields instead. With the men's absent during the conflict, women were the backbone of the villages and household economics, since Batak men's work territory is the forest, and their husbands were under surveillance and unable to carry out their usual work. The Batak women play an important role in the social movements against Toba Pulp Lestari land grabbing and in their victory. So in 2016, Indonesian government finally granted the customary right to the people of Batak Toba. It's been the first case and the first winning of the struggle among indigenous people, and it's actually a landmark for a lot of legal studies in Indonesia, because technically speaking, our constitutions kind of discriminates the indigenous people, and it's actually a really big deal to win in this case, especially in the state that do not recognize you as a citizen because you are not modern. But I would like to emphasize that just because they win doesn't mean there's no doesn't mean like it's also followed up by like all encompassing or like bright stories afterwards, because there is. So despite this is an extraordinary achievement for the people there has been a bureaucratic dragging. So even though the rights have been granted in 2016 until 2020, the law has not been in resolve or like has not been materialized. So it's kind of stuck at the legislative house and the local politics, even though the mapping is done. So we hopefully expect that the bill will be materialized into 2021, hopefully, finger crossed. And I just want to bring it to awareness about this, the book. So on the top, so it's a newly published book in Indonesian about the collective identity and the mobilization of Pandumaan Sipituhuta by the current director of the working group that I mentioned, the Lima Silalahi. And if you speak Indonesian or if you're in Indonesia and are curious about this case, I encourage you to get a copy of this book. And at the bottom is the benzoin forest. So this is actually the forest here. With one of my key informants who also work in the NGO. This is the benzoin forest. So you can see like the benzoin forest is not a monoculture. They need other trees to actually thrive. And that's also part of the protests and the struggles and the problems that the benzoin farmers face during the conflict, because it's not just the fact that there are 200 trees that are cut, but the ecosystem that maintained the productivity of the benzoin trees were also jeopardized. So this is the map, because I love maps and I feel like there's an unwritten rule for Global South scholars to map where the research is. So this, here we are, at least I'm here now in Chicago, and this is Sumatra, this is in Indonesia, this is the part of this is Sumatra, and this is the village where it's located. It's like in the southern part of the largest volcanic lake in the world, that is Lake Toba. Very beautiful area. I strongly recommend you to go there for your vacation. Let's see. Oops. Okay. So in that question, so I sense that because this research is kind of like driven by the question of what happened to women after all this empowerment narrative that we have during this conflict. Because a lot of studies of what happened after a woman during the conflict almost studied in the context that women lost everything. But in this case, I have an extreme case in which like, well, they actually won, in which like in land conflict, this is a very huge achievement. Given like we know, especially in Southeast Asia, we have been a hotbed of agrarian conflicts in which, according to Transnational Institute research, um, that the time that it took for agrarian conflicts to resolve and not in the favor of the people there, it can take in average like 40 years to 20 years. So it's a very long time, and like in under 20 years, the people of Mandumasi Pituta have been able to achieve this accomplishment. But then when the community won, we don't really address what actually happened to women, given that the ecosystem has changed. So, and what happened after we already agreed that at certain degree that conflict can empower women. This is actually a very much well-rounded findings among gender scholars and feminist political ecologists. But then what happened after that, once we count the ecosystem have changed, it alters the woman's labor. How do environmental shocks and the rearrangement of the ecosystem alter the gender structures and its performance among women? So basically, I'm asking, will the gender structure that empowered and uplift women during the conflict are maintained even after the conflict has been resolved? And that resolution also have been favorable for women. There's no easy answer, by the way, to that. So we're gonna like discuss it further. And I use two simple frameworks on this. So it's environmental justice, destruction and crisis. Of course, feminist political ecology that have been basically studying this woman empowerment conflict in an environmental setting, because also there's a lot of studies in women and conflict but their studies mostly exclusively on women and war, but not really attentive to the changing ecosystem or the environment or natural resources that the woman, in which like when it's changed, it really heavily impacts women. And there's also like the element of gender, which is actually the core of this research. It is studying gender structure, because like when I studied this and when I researched this, I want to know what is the tipping point that we can undo or restructure gender, what condition or what circumstance in the conflict, and what is the timing when we can actually uproot the gender structure, meaning like we give more power to women, as like many, and also like in my findings later I will show you that during this after this conflict, women actually unionized. So it's like something very new to the community. Like they have a woman farmers union now. They recently elected they recently elected the head of the village entrepreneurs. It's actually official government appointed position, and for the first time in their history is woman. And there's a growing sense among women that, well, we actually work so much for this community and we want a compensation for that, a fair compensation. So there's actually like again, like this is not a new findings for a lot of people who studying conflicts. That it was like women gain more power and have more access to power. Um, and the thing that I would like to tweak later is also like how at the same time this empowerment kind of like jeopardize the process of restructuring gender precisely after the conflict. There's some higher reliance on women's labor, and we will discuss it further later, of course, but I will also pay attention more to the reproductive side of labor, like emotional labor, cognitive labor, that is actually very hard to account for, actually measured in labor time. Although I actually in my research record their labor time, and but I was unable. I mean, methodologically, it's almost impossible to actually count for how much people think in their lives to planning about their life. Let's see. So these are my methods. Uh, I draw my data from ethnography, so it's during July and September 2019, and I went back again to the village for a different harvesting season. So July and September is a dry season. They only like planting or harvested coffee or like other small vegetable and herb gardens. But in December, just like many farmers in Indonesia, they plant rice. So I went back on December to see how the labor time changes as it has different community. And I do interviews in Panduman Sipituhuta in Jakarta, and especially in the village, I use Batak, Toba, and Indonesian interchangeably. And the ethnographic portion leads me to join women's labor in the field and sometimes help them to observe their labor condition and record their labor time in a day. So I use labor time to later connect women's concerns about environmental changes with their post-conflict grievances and then analyze them. The interviews are like 27 women, women farmers for men of their husbands. So 7 local national organizers. And these interviews have two aims. First, to investigate their economic and labor decisions, distribution of labor, grievances, and complaints. And second, to verify my field observation. Data triangulation is also needed to connect women's grievances with the environmental degradation to avoid the emphasis on hearsaying. So of course, like as an ethnographer, I feel like at some certain point, like we have to believe what we have, but we cannot like have that at face value. So it becomes like more common to actually triangulate your ethnographic data. And the thing that my informants always bring to me is like my agriculture outputs are just like decreasing over the year. So I went to Indonesia Biodiversity Soil Lab testing. So I actually test the soil quality to actually understand whether it's true or not. Like not only in the meaning way, but even like I found the even if I found that the land is actually okay, or like the soil fertility is okay, it's actually more confusing and like more adding to the puzzle. But my finding in soil testing, which I'll show you later, actually confirming the woman's grievances about their agricultural outputs and their anxiety over the quality of their labor. Okay, so these are the findings, these are my findings from those soil testing and the labor time. So you see, like in the riverbank, it's so the riverbank next to the riverbank is a vast rice fields. It's been eroded, located next to the rice field. So because this riverbank is actually the source is actually from the forest that had been land grabbed. So it's actually very kind of like and the organization also recorded this situation, like since the corporation came, there's the erosion, especially in nearby the forest, actually got worse. And the texture sand loam, this is like poor. So there's when I went there, there's also a lot of like rice fields that have been eroded, and like a couple of families told me that, well, I can no longer grow rice because like basically my rice fields are gone. And the rice field in the middle part, so coming from the riverbank and like going to the middle is a better, so, but like it's not really the best. It's moderate. It's just fine, but it's prone to flood that gets more frequent over the year. In coffee field, this is the most important thing that I believe. because this is the dependence. If you have a rice production and and the money or the outcomes coming from the rice fields are running out, the people in the village rely on the coffee fields. But the problem is the quality of the soil is also getting poorer. And I triangulate the data as well with the numbers from the district statistics. So over the year, the coffee productions also got decreasing. The quality also got decreasing. And I also confirmed this with the coffee buyers and the benzoin buyers too there, that like they start not to buying from these people, although there's still some established relationship, but they seek more opportunities from other villages that are not impacted by the situation. There's also my findings on labor time. This total here is not 24 hours because there's a lot of times when women especially doing multitasking. So for example, like if you're doing household chores, maybe you're doing that while you're caring for the extended family. So as you can see, there's like a couple of striking differences between women and men in their labor time sharing. But I find it interesting that childcare is not so much like striking. So I kind of expect like it's gonna be like super different. But then uh, I only like see like over an hour or so, and it said like the woman said to me like, so during the conflict, when woman went to the coffee field and like the man could not go to work, the husband will take care of the children. So it's become like more usual for men in the fields. It's like we're gonna take care of the children and it's fine. And I found it also in my field observation. And of course, this is actually nothing new. Having women working in 10 hours a day in the field work, this has been established since the development studies of women since the 1970s. Is even more precarious during rice season, because in rice season they could work until like 12 hours in the field, and even like when it's raining. So we're not only talking about the quantity of labor time, there's also quality of labor. So there was like a couple of times in which like it was raining and the woman would not go back home because they said like, well, somebody got to work in this. So there's like a very stark condition in which like if there's a raining in the benzoin forest, you cannot climb to the benzoin forest and tap it because it's going to be so slippery. So the men will like get back to their little houses or little wooden barracks in the forest or like nearby the forest, meaning like they will not work. But during the rain, women will work. So it's kind of very classic telltale story of the difference of quality and within the sexual division of labor. Okay, so this is my main findings after I thematize it. So versus the irreversible damage, meaning like when this irreversible damage refers to the condition of the ecosystem that you cannot just like change instantly. Meaning that like when you land grab the forestry, it just like change the ecosystem. That's basically what my informants were saying to me. There's a more frequent flooding. So when I went there on December, at least there are 3 to 4 floodings in 1 week, and they have to rework again their whole rice fields there, because otherwise your rice field will not gonna like produce anything because it's damaged. So you have to like yeah, what is it in English term, that you have to replant it again at some point, otherwise it's not gonna go well. And there's also prolonged drought that influence the coffee production, and of course it will lead to decreasing agricultural products. So there's some like cyclical pattern here, what happened after the ecosystem changes, but it is something that you can easily fix. But it doesn't mean that the woman or like the people there would not seek help for this. So there's a couple of meetings that I attended among the farmer unions that they asked the government to help, but more likely in the rice field. So during my summer field work, they discussed the possibilities of the government help them by providing like cattle for plowing and everything, but rarely addressing the coffee field situation in which like it's almost exclusively belong to women's work. There's also shift in that, so the whole changing the ecosystem shifts the division of labor, or like who's becoming the breadwinner. So it's getting more equal in the sense that because the benzoin production also decreases, so more households getting more reliance on women's work in the coffee field, which is actually not is is not really comparable to what men produces with benzoin. To give you a picture, 1 pound or 1 pound, 1 kilograms or 2 pounds of benzoin can cost you like $18 minimum, and the maximum can be like 20 to 25. So they can be really like really it can be like really lucrative commodity, but in the good days. But like of course after given the decreasing quality of the benzoin after the ecosystem has been destroyed, uh, even like the price for benzoin right now is very low. So the benzoin buyer that I interview says like I cannot buy this kind of quality more than $17 to $18 per kilogram, and it kind of really changed the power dynamics within the household, because like now basically you slash half of the man's income, so you have to rely on woman's production for that. And of course it's coffee or like small herbs garden that like has been notoriously known that women's work are not as valuable as men. Like all of again, to give you a picture, all of the gardens or like all of the herbs that the woman produce, including coffee, could not weigh more than like $15 kilogram at most, and it does at most, meaning like it can be go lower as like $10 of the all commodities that women work on combined. So but even though, because like that's the only channel that the households can tap, so they have to rely more on women, and it kind of changed the power on discretionary or decision making within the household. So one of my informants said like nowadays, like if because like my husband do not have any money, I mean like I have no reason to say yes, right, to him. Like so they kind of like women have more power because like they whether they like it or not, whether like the men will actually agree or not, they have to rely on that meaning like women's work. And of course, there's rising gender awareness among women after this whole conflict. This is like I already explained it before. But at the same time, it's not like a situation in which like, oh, are you suggesting that men do not like it? Men actually very acknowledging about that. Uh, like they're very aware that women in their community work so hard, and the fact that they can mobilize during the conflict is also partly because they have a very equal fair share of labor during the mobilization. And the community organizer that I asked admitted that it's part of their strategic during the mobilization, because like if you cannot, because the part of the mobilization also account for what happened for gender. So they want like the movements to be like a fair share of like labor division in terms of mobilization, like during in the movement. And like actually men have no quarrel for that, like they like the idea, especially after like men got kidnapped or like just like taken away. So the wife be like, you cannot go outside like me work, so you can just stay in the forest or just stay in the coffee field, uh and like hiding basically. It's not working. It's not like helping women working, it's just like they're hiding there. And it also, but it then translates to gender sense of precarity, because like this kind of more burdens on women cannot be shared on men, because they still maintain the strict labor divisions in terms of work, in terms of working in the field, but not so much of reproductive work. So it's like a very layers of gender restructuring there. So this is, for example, like I live. This is actually my favorite quote from my host. So I stayed at his home, and this is like, so I was trying to drink milk. This is like actually goat milk powder that's been shared by the local community or puskesmas in Indonesia. So it was like primary health clinic. So I said like, that's your mother, meaning my housewife. Woman here has to be healthy. If I die, nothing is going to change. If woman gets sick, nothing's gonna get done. So, and like he said, he's just smiling. And this is the kind of like acknowledgement that is like kind of like witty, but but like it's not like he's joking or like trying to demean that. Like he actually say like, if I die, really nothing's gonna happen, because like and it's gonna be fine, because I know women work better than me, and we're men. This is like really not doing anything. So it's kind of like a little bit self-deprecating in a sense, but also like quite a respect for women, because like they know and they acknowledge that. And there's also just as this one funny instance, but there's also like a lot of couple of instances in which like I asked my informants as well. Well, at least in many families that we think that the like labor division should be equal, women and men should be like working like together and so forth. And the second theme that I got is like the reversible gender. So we see that the story of women get empowered by conflict. So at least it's conflict-induced empowerment, which is like very typical findings in many conflict or like post-conflict situation. But the problem is when it does not translate to materialization of acknowledgement. Like cultural acknowledgement is great. I think we need that, but the problem is like when when women in the village says like, great that my husband now respect me, great that I now can raise my voice for my husband, but still we got no money. And the fact that the village rely more on women's work, it becomes like acknowledged. So it's like become a double-edged sword in which like it's because like, this is a very classical feminist and gender scholars problem in which like you kind of penalize women's work, you penalize women's participation acknowledgement of labor by by disincentivizing their work. So it becomes more burdensome on women become labor, but at the same time, this labor becomes their entry point in raising awareness for their own inequality, having them to organize among themselves, having like unionizing each other, because there's a reliance on women's work, and this work is not as valuable as their male counterparts. And the interesting part is also that woman is also reinforces this image of disciplined, hardworking woman. So I don't know if you're studying Batak or like if you're Batak people. I'm half Batak myself. Ara is, and there's this image, a cultural image that the ideal Batak women are this are hardworking ones, and this is also that was shared in among the village, among the women in the village. So they have this system called of collective labor that called marsiripa, meaning like if I, for example, if I have a field and my friends like working in the coffee field too, my friend will help me on Tuesday, and on Wednesday I will help them working in their field. So it's like a communal and collective work, or like another version of like what you have in mind of collective work. But then it becomes like something that is disciplinary mechanism of women's having to work harder than before. And if women cannot like did not show up for whatever reason, even though they know, and they were like, oh, what a pity that like, oh my God, she's sick. If she's sick, what's gonna happen to her family? That's basically what's the colloquial language the women use. They're like pitying women who are sick, not because like they are sick, but also because like when women are sick, backing up again to my host saying, like nothing's gonna get done because like men are not gonna help them in the coffee field because there's a very strict labor division. And I do not want to sound like I blame men, but it's also partly the problem, the fact that if as a man working to benzoin forest, they do not go back and forth from home to benzoin forest. They will stay in the forest for 5 days. So their divisional labor, like their system itself, is also cannot really help women to have someone or like men in the household help them in the coffee field or like their gardens, because basically men are in the forest working, and they only come back in the weekend for church or like Friday if something is it's like they forgot something like their lunch boxes or whatever, but they will always go back again to the forest. um, and this is why, because like there's a relying it's also decreasing reliance on women's each other's help in the field. And it's also become like some like a patriarchal vessel to say like to actually basically measure how good you are as a woman based on like how much hard work that you put into others' labor and you yourself as a laborers too. So this is part of that we're like paying attention to. Like this is also like sources. Like I find it like, so I presented this research as well in the ethnography workshop of a couple of weeks ago, and the thing that they helped me to understand the problem of grievance is also very salient in emotional labor. There is a very much we have to pay attention to this after post-conflict. It's not just like having resources, but actually attune to what women feel and like how their body feels about labor, and the fact that affect really affects everything what comes after the conflict. So there's a rising awareness of and more precarious situation for cognitive labor, in which like now they have less resources, but their necessities like bills and whatever are staying the same, if not growing or if not skyrocketing. For example, like a lot of my informants have like children in like school years, and it was like they have to pay still. So like I really like this particular code on planning. That basically, so one time when I just like sat down at stall writing my field work, suddenly my informant said like, I'm really having this hard time right now. Can you believe like this after the conflict? We lost quite a lot of my husband's income. And of course I have to work harder because I have to support my husband and my family, planting this and that. And he only bring $18 and it will take $10 for his cigarettes and whatever. And I only have like $7 for a whole week with my three children. And like these three children are like still in the first grade, second grade, third grade of elementary school. And they have to like go outside the village just to go to school because because sometimes there's like a different system of schooling in Indonesia that you also like based on your address and whatever. And sometimes the schools in the village also cannot take more students, so they have to send their children to go to the different villages in which they have to take public transportation every single day. Because like sometimes Saturdays also like children go to school on Saturday in Indonesia, especially in public school, and all of them, the children, take at least $1 per day for going to school, and I left with $5, like even $3 afterwards, for a whole kitchen of 5 people. It's not going to be enough. So I have to ask myself, how should I get more money? Where are the sources? It's an endless question. So the way like her body, like the way her body also like jerk and just like putting her hands on her head is just saying like, I can't think about this like every single day, every single week's coming. It's just like showing grievances and frustration over like planning when you have so much less resources than you used to have. And also there's also a mitigation plan that also fall on women because like they're the one with more diversified field for work. Like, okay, the coffee field got destroyed, and then the rice got destroyed partially. So I have this little small plot of gardens that usually I attended to. So she started to planting like onions and what like less valuable herbs or like other commodities that is not really commodities because like it's really small. So this is to give you a picture how more burden put on the woman. It's not so much only about only work, only the value of their work, but also the way like they embody this work. This is the alternatives of this is the so to conclude, this is actually the alternative title of my presentation, the afterlives of mobilization. Um, after my upon my consultation with the ethnography workshop. So I hope that my study can contribute to the understanding of gender changes and in practice what we should pay attention to in the aftermath of conflicts, regardless what the outcomes. Because like of course if you're losing, well it's gonna be like bad, but even like it's winning, there's like a certain changes that you have to pay attention to in order to like restructuring or like dismantle the inequality that may persist even after the outcomes are very favorable to people. And in the increasingly frail living condition, we have to reconfigure our relationship with the environment and rethink the co-constitutive nature between the social world and the biophysical environment. What I present here is a crude argument for socio-ecological law that I define as the limits of social reordering, meaning like the uprooting of social structure after a conflict because of the quality and outcomes of the interaction between the environmental rearrangement and gender changes. Meaning just because like there's a certain empowerment happen for like gender specific problem, you have to look at other structures as well, because this like gender structures may relate to the like indigenous politics and so forth. It may relate to the rearrangement or of biophysical environments that really affect women's work, that will later affects how women's doing politics in the community. And of course, when we discuss problems like inequality that directly touch upon how we utilize or use, of course, you do not like the word of utilize, negotiate and access resources for our everyday lives, the environment may be more pivotal than we think. That's all about my presentation, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Pepe, for that really great presentation. It's super interesting. So we're going to start our Q&A session now. And if people have any questions for Pepe, please put your questions on the chat box or just raise your hand and I'll call you out and ask you to unmute. We already have one person with raised hand, Bambang Trihatmojo. If you could please unmute.
Oh no.
Hey, thank you, Pepe, for the good, wonderful presentation. I have a couple of questions. First is maybe clarifying questions. When you're talking about decreasing agricultural products, what did you mean? Like, was that the yield or the quality? Because later on your finding in the mitigation section, it's mentioned about the lesser rice. So I suspect it's more like yields than the quality. But maybe it could be. Just a clarifying question. Second one, you mentioned about the unionizations of the women labor, right? What I'm curious is that did your field work also capture how women organize effort to get to gain fair incentive for their labor, due to the changing of the environment?
Can you repeat the later part of your question?
My question is that you mentioned about the unionizations and also your finding indicating about the increasing awareness of women positionality among themselves, in comparison to the male villagers. So my question was that did you also find how the mechanism or how women organize their efforts to get a fair incentive, or for their increasing labor contribution as the effect of changing environment?
Actually, it's a really great question. Sorry, is that okay if I just jump to the answer, Lara? Cool. Yeah. So women's unionizing is actually okay. So like everyone's just like great because the current unions that they have for farmers unions, they are mostly for benzoin tappers and the rice production, which is just like when I forgot to mention that actually during rice production, men help only for the first 2 weeks. So the rest of like maintenance work belongs to women, meaning if like something happened, like for example like the drought, the flooding or like the floods, it's women's work to maintain again and fix the rice fields. This is actually not new. So when women want to unionize, I mean like the reception are just fine, like we need that. The problem arises, interestingly, it's actually class problems, because when I say like these are farmers, they're not like all poor, yeah, because in the Batak land ownership system, you have a ruling clan, you have like marga baru, or I mean so it's like not the ruling clan, and of course the difference of land share are different based on the clans, and what rises then after women unionizes class interest of like the richer families versus like the poorer families. Who's gonna run the unions? Who's gonna like talking to this politician, or like who have the more connections to this richer people outside the village to bring more resources? So that's the problem that I at least observe. I may miss something else, but at least that's the first problem that they encounter once like they group like as a woman, as a collective identity. Now class-based or like material interests start chimming in.
Great, thank you. Next, we have Mitrardi Sankoyo. If you could please unmute yourself and ask a question.
I actually didn't raise my hand. So if someone else has a question, they can.
Oh, well, okay. Muhammad Rida.
Thank you, Ara. Pepe, congratulations for your presentation in here. It's really interesting. research project. I'm just curious about how you see the problem of, to some extent, the limit of process of emancipation in here with regard to the broader political process, because I also have experience in 2016 doing my fieldwork of on indigenous people political intervention in the election of 2014, and I found that these two villages, Hasundutan and also, what is the name again? Sorry. Uh, yeah, these two villages that you research in here, they quite successful in promoting their own figure when in a local level. So I'm just curious how the broader political process, particularly in terms of state politics in here, also might play a role in shaping uh, the outcome that you mentioned in your research project. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is the time to bring back the historical part of this struggle. Toba Paplustari used to be Indorayan, so it's like the name used to be Indorayan, and this corporation has been destroying half part of the North Sumatra since 1980s. So this is something, the kind of like common enemy that a lot of indigenous Batak knows for so long, and like it's been like so repetitive to the point like there's just like at certain point like a collective memories of what this corporation brings to this to the people. Like one of my informants say like, I don't want to say this, but this fucking corporation, man, was like, oh, okay. And they're like a very good God-loving Christian, so it's like a very shocking for me to say, to have them swear. And like they use the term biang. Uh, if you're a Batak, you do not want to be called biang by these people. It means dog, but like it's meaning like it's a very derogative term. Uh, so there's like historical part of this mobilization that because like this what happened. So the interesting part is we have two successful cases of Panduman and Sipituhuta, but what happened in 2009 also happens in other villages too. So this expansion of eucalyptic plantation, monoculture plantation, it's been like it's been universe for a lot of villages. So I didn't mention in my presentation, but I went to the workshop that KSPPM or like the working group held, and they basically like there are 30 people from different Batak Toba regions, and they're saying like whatever we have a common enemy that is Toba Polpastari, and like and it's a different cases from cases, but it's always been like this one single corporation that like help that like basically destroy their livelihoods. So and also like the way it was like mobilized is interesting because they partly because the indigenous politics play an important role in shaping this narrative for the struggle. So initially they wanted to have like struggle over natural resources, so it's like a benzoin farmer sovereignty, but the advocates and the like organizers say like I think it's the perfect time to talk about indigenous politics because it's a sacred forest and whatnot. So that's part of like what mobilized them greatly because like the narrative that employed during the mobilization and during the conflict is not it's bigger than these two villages that will be destroyed. It's about like how Batak people have been destroyed for 30 years since 1980s when the chemical plant of Indorayon or like the current Toba Paplestari exploded and like basically spilled their chemical plants to the Asahan River and like just basically change the ecosystem and like the environmental politics of North Sumatra. And the way like it mobilizes around these narratives are actually very impactful because like they will come to me at my and like the idea of like Hamin John the benzoin in Batak Toba is a very powerful concept because like a lot of like Batak Toba farmers use this tree as like their symbol of struggle. And this is like this is not like only exclusive to like Pandumaan and Sipitu Huta politics. Like there's a lot of like Batak farmers, even like my mother's family tap a benzo in our hometown, and it's just like it's the narrative is they will come at me today. They're coming at me today. And they will sure definitely come for you tomorrow because like they have this same string of like changing this like their sacred benzoin forest. And like that's why it transcends to other communities in Batak Toba region. And I feel like that also I know it sounds like an identity politics, but I feel like identity politics is both recognition and like material as a material politics as well. And that to a certain degree, or at least what the organizer believed in the book that I promoted in early my slides, believe so. Because like previously they just framed this as like environmental politics, environmental justice, but they did not grasp what really that people felt about Hamilton or the benzoin trees.
Thank you, Pepe. Next, we have a question from Mbak Oka.
Hi, Pepe. Hi, semua. Thank you. Pepe, I have a question about.
Kak Oka, you got muted.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, it's very strange that it says Mitrardi Sangkoyo. He's my brother, and I got this Zoom link. He sent me the Zoom link, so that's maybe why my name is my brother's name. So apologies about that. Okay, so Pepe, coming at it from kind of a different disciplinary angle, I love that you talked about the emotional labor and the different kinds of labor actually that are embodied by these women. And I was wondering about systems of care that might be gender specific, and also networks of care that might go beyond political organizing, whether it be religious or other forms of community between these women. Thanks.
Great question. I have a different paper for this. There's so system of care is really central, both like I feel like before the conflict and especially during the conflict. So the church really play an important part during like providing system of care because like they're predominantly Christians. And they rely even like during the conflicts and during the mobilization, the news that they get is not from like, so they have a very serious trust issue during the conflict, and they only believe whatever that their priest or like the church rely on them. So that's the first system of care that come from them. This is not only beyond like sharing their labor burden, like the system of Masiripak that I that explained before, but also like it extended like in terms of health actually. So so I have a different paper on this, how like the idea of healthism or like the way you impose like a certain idea of like how do you think about being healthy means is a very community based. They do not like being unhealthy because they don't want to burden or like, even though they actually feel like it's actually they actually expect people to help them, like especially among women. Like during my observation is very typical. If I stayed at one home, suddenly like another woman came and was like, hey, have you heard about this, blah 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 blah, and like even I even like went to one of my informants when they were sick, and like suddenly there's like a 5 women there like attending to her. So system of care are particularly strong among women, and it also altered like their idea of about being healthy, and like the way they care about each other. And during the conflict, even like they help other friends' husband to hike the coffee fields if your coffee fields were really small, to the point like the basically police officer can just like get into the coffee fields and just like grab your husbands. And other like women saying like, you can hide in my coffee fields, but it's always through women. Because like I feel like the system of care that a woman had that have like I said have been having until now are well more established. And I believe this is something that the organizer and the advocates really realize, because like the organizer were women. So during the working groups headed by women, and the main advocates, there's also women, and they were like, the system of care is the first. This is the first thing that we should weaponize for them. and against the corporation. That this is the system of care that we're actually talking about. And that's why I say like system of caring is very possible to stand between the anarchy or like order and chaos, because like this is what actually maintains the whole community during the conflict. You got like there are 500 households. Most of them cannot go work to the forest. And the first system that really helped them is actually the system of caring. And one woman like you, I will go to your work today, tomorrow, whatnot. And there's a very neat schedule actually to that. So there's like really, I think it deserves more attention to that in its own. So beyond my research, I think it deserves its own research topic. Actually, it's a dissertation level material there of system of caring. And I really like, and thank you for asking that, because it's really important to emphasize that. Thank you.
Great. Shout out to HKBP, I guess, Pepe. So next we have a question from Nika. Please go ahead, Nika.
Right. Thank you, Ara. Thank you, Pepe,
Well,
for the
just text
presentation.
me.
No, because I want you to explain more, because I know that your presentation and paper is very theoretically driven. So I'm wondering if you can elaborate more on the theoretical underpinning of using time in gender environment framework, because as a historian in training, I'm very obsessed with time. Because
Really?
because I'm wondering what happened and or perhaps not happened during the transition, or perhaps this is conflation of time during the conflict time and the post-conflict, and what happened in between or not happened in between that change the gender structure in a way. If perhaps the simpler question is at what moments, and this is also attached to my question about how your informants share their grievances, because where they talk about the good old days or the bad old days. So I'm wondering if even within their grievances, there's a chronopolitics, like the politics of time in there as well. So not only their labor time, but also the time of that associated with the past or something.
Right. Yes. Thank you for showing the part that I do not show, but like available in my paper. So yes, do I feel like the moment it changes is like really in one morning of 2009 when Obaka went to the store, because one of my informants shared this like a very powerful quote that say, "The moment that they destroy my trees, that's the moment I know that they rob my future." I feel like that's a very long way ahead to imagine time or something like happened today. And this is not something like what I really like about my informants, like especially the woman informants, they do not like, they do have a certain like romanticization of past, the time like or good old days, but even that they knew like something's coming up for them. So I mean, like to be specific, they, and also like this is the thing that has been worked on by the organization or the advocates that help them is climate change, like the decreasing thing. So, but like it's not as bad, or at least it got worse after the land grabbing, and it's just and it's an interesting part also, like the way they look back, they did not like the gender structure at all. And this is not storytelling of, this is not like a telltale of like how indigenous people think that like everything is going great with their cosmopolitics or like cosmology politics. Woman knows exactly, like even like in their culture, they're like second in structure. So every Batak families that I know, especially if you're like a really have strong values, and Batak families have this family or kinship map that what do we call it, Ara? Like the kinship table. So it's basically, yeah. So it's basic. So it will list your like ancestor, but only man's name will be there. So like one time I went to like my informant's family. My informants, I went to one of my informants' house with their families, and there's like they have this little like the kinship map. I was like, And my informants only have, so she's Farsi and like has 3 daughters. I was like, oh my god. So which part of this planet are you from? And she was like, don't talk to me about that. I'm sad because I like my family will never be on that map. So they do not like. There's a very selective way of like looking at the past. And it was like I find it very interesting because like, oh, that name is Tarombo. So it's a very layered seeing about time because like they know like when they're like working time means like they are very aware about the social structure among the Batak families, but when it comes to their like natural resources and what is being shared with them, they can't see them as like as a communal property. So it's a very layer. It's not like a romanticizing of things. And yeah, definitely like they have a very different sensing of timing. Um, like it is very different. And I don't want to make this about like what man thinks about them, what woman thinks about them, but I feel like it's labor induced of seeing things when you work like 12 hours in the field as compared like you stay in the forest for like a couple of hours and not working. If it's raining, it will alter your sense of time. And that's why like the woman that I talk to mostly think about like what should I do next now that everything's lost versus like men who saying like, oh, I'm still going back to the forest because we won, right? Versus woman who got like a direct impact because like now more floods come to their fields because like they're the one working the field, like with limited help of course from their male members of the family. Yeah.
Thanks, Pepe. We still have time for one more question. If anybody has a question, please just put it on the chat box or raise their hand. Well, if not, I actually have a question, Pepe. So I'll use my prerogative as the moderator to ask a question, right? So you mentioned a lot about coffee fields as basically safety net for Batak women's economy, right? And of course, as you also know, there's also a lot of initiative that is being glossed over in reports saying that direct purchase by cutting down middlemen or just trying to ease access for direct purchase between buyers and also from the farmers themselves. And then being used as saying that this is fair trade or saying that this is helping to alleviate women farmers out of their poverty. And seeing your presentation, it seems that this belief, this sense of moral justification over purchase seems this doesn't work that way. And I wonder whether you have any thoughts on whether direct purchase or ethical purchases really helps alleviate women's position, especially as it relates to coffee.
You know what I'm thinking about this? I think we discussed this a lot. I don't know actually. I like the idea of buying things give me power, but like, and I do believe that there's certain power that we can address to agency to do that. It's not like something, especially in a country like Indonesia and US actually, for example, with a very strong like consumers power actually. So it's not something like to be belittled. Of course, it's not going to be effective, but the question is not so much about effectivity rather than will it lead to something. Um, I mean, I personally do not like practice like ethic policy. I mean, I'm a vegetarian, so there's kind of like a certain point. It's like an ethical, it's an ethical conscious about like choosing what you eat or like what you buy. But in terms of coffee, there's a very interesting question because there's a lot of problems with ethical buying and ethical like fair trades that doesn't really trickle down to women in the coffee field, at least the way I see it. especially with the woman there, because in order to do that, you have to have this certain bureaucratic ways that have to go up. Like, for example, a lot of coffee that you find in Starbucks is from Mandailing, so it's like a southwest part of the North Sumatra. And like that's the most like, and like it's not every coffee can be fair traded. Yeah, and like in order to have that, it requires more capital actually to make your coffee fields be fair traded. This is what happened with palm oils too. It's hard. It will require more labor. Ironically, it requires more capital for women because they have to be standardized. Like you're not allowed like any woman that I met in my fields are not gonna pass the standardization of fair trades. They do not work with I don't know. They do not have like a good work equipment and everything. So that's the thing to address first, and then we'll see how effective it will be. And because like just because it's ethical or like fair trade, it doesn't mean you will not put more labor or like more burdens to women in the field. Like you can say it's fair traded, but do you know how much women have to pay to be fair traded? Like it can cost someone like a $500. It was like it can be half of their annual income. My informant's average annual income is like $875 per year. Like $500, this will be fair traded are a lot. So this is something that we have to think about if you want to like go fair trade or like being ethical. And like this raises an important question because Lintong coffee, the one that my informants planted, actually the best Arabic coffee in the world. Like it's even better than Mandailing. I don't like coffee, but I can attest to that. I think so. Don't buy my judgment because I don't like coffee. But the problem is like to make it standardized because like the more established coffee fields are in the southwest, that is like the basically is the legacy of colonial plantations there. So it's well built already. It's well built because like it goes up and it buys by rules of the like Western standardization of fields and planting, as compared to just like little smaller coffee owners that can only like produce for locals, which I also support. So that's a really to unpack. There's a really a lot of things to unpack.
Thank you, Pepe. If we could all just give a loud round of applause for Pepe for this really great presentation. Thank you, Pepe. So before we let everybody go, I'd just like to again direct your attention to our next speaker series, which will be on Wednesday, December 9, 2020. We'll have Casey Drower talking about her research, metaphysical access to water and ontologically oriented political ecology at Ventura, Belize. And yeah, go check out our website, www.edgs.northwestern.edu for more information. Thank you very much for attending this talk, everybody, and we'll see you in the next talk. Bye-bye.